We are on the grounds of the Indiana Veterans Cemetery. The railroad has a spur that comes in where we used to serve the state hospital and bring coal trains. So we maintain the spur and we are putting storage cars. Because we acquired 2 locomotives from the Crane Naval Depot and 1 from the NASA Kennedy Space Center, we wanted to pay our respects to the military and NASA for their gift to the railroad. And so we did special paint work and artwork to honor that.
I served in the United States Army. I enlisted on May 30th, 1973. Enlistment ended on May 30th, 1977. I did spend an additional 6 years in the Army Reserve, but I was a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division. I jumped out of perfectly good airplanes for a heck of it. To me, this is wonderful. These 3 locomotives, they each have their own identity, and their contribution, especially this locomotive, number 4, honors the USS Indianapolis, which is the last major Navy warship sunk in World War II.
Well, it was very humbling to watch the emotions from the people that had served and their kind remarks. I think they were very appreciative that we gave thought to the fact that their heritage, that they were retired locomotives from the Navy, the Army, and NASA, and so I think it meant a lot to them.
It's a Memorial Day event honoring veterans, as all Memorial Day events do, being put on by the Indiana Veterans Association in conjunction with the American Legion here. I've been 34 years in the Indiana Army National Guard with 3 deployments overseas. Always been in the Indiana Army National Guard. I'm very proud of Indiana and very proud of the support that Indiana has given to its veterans and its active serving members. Indiana has the 4th largest National Guard in the entire nation, despite being the 18th largest state, and that is a lot because of the support we get from the citizens of Indiana. Anytime you see an organization honoring veterans, honoring the military, it always gives you pride, of course.
The track that we have here for our locomotives today for the Memorial Day service was actually part of the original coal lead that supplied coal into the Madison State Hospital. We're actually standing right on the right-of-way. This is one of the first customers Madison Railroad ever had. The rail coming into this place, though, was 75 pounds. You bring a load of coal cars in here, they were derailing all the time. There's no ballast whatsoever. The lead hadn't been used in 35 years. We have tree stumps that are probably 12 inches around that were wrapped around the rail. We decided to restore the track back to service for the purpose of storing cars. However, the railroad was cut at the very first crossing here in Madison State Hospital. There was just 2 rails coming out of the asphalt. We decided to add 165 feet of rail for the purpose of this dedication to make it even that much more special. And the 165 feet that comes beyond this crossing was put in from surplus rail we had with all new ties. The bumper post came out of a spare location at Jefferson Proving Ground. And we decided to dedicate this track for today's service only. So our memorial fleet of locomotives, the track they're sitting on, most likely will not be back on it again. We will never put storage cars on it. It strictly will be maintained as a marker. The only exception is there might be a rare exception where we might have a military person that is being buried over at the adjacent cemetery, at the Indiana Veterans Cemetery, that we would bring in somebody's remains by train. That is the only time that we would use that 165 feet of track. The storage cars will always be kept north of the crossing on the old Madison Hospital lead. And we are honored to be able to do this today in conjunction with the Indiana Veterans Cemetery in Madison, Indiana. Locomotive number 3, you will find as the same locomotive 3 that's in the NASA documentaries that you may find on certain media sources. Number 3 was originally a Toledo, Peoria, and Western locomotive. It was part of an order of brand new locomotives that they ordered, one of the last that Toledo, Peoria, and Western ordered. The locomotive was sold to NASA in the early 80s with the 2 of its sisters and went to be completely overhauled and ended up in the traditional, what we know as NASA's colors on their railroad. Those 3 locomotives ended up covering all the era of the Space Shuttle program, from the first launch to the last launch, handling rocket boosters and other vital resources that was used to support the Space Shuttle program. Number 3 was the last locomotive used at the Kennedy Space Center. And of the 3 locomotives that was there, 1, 2, and 3, it was the only one to get repainted in the red, white, and blue. As the space shuttle program was winding down, NASA was looking at ways, as far as the NASA Railroad, on what ways they will survive into the future as a railroad. What would it look like? They decided to bring number 3 in and to paint it up, fix it up, do a lot of mechanical work on it. They eventually swapped the trucks out with another one of the locomotives there, number 2. And they decided to make a showpiece of it, kind of showing their railroad off. They were looking to the future, hoping that they would receive more possibly military shipments in there. They weren't quite sure what the future held. Now, the Madison Railroad knew that they were looking at retiring these locomotives. And unfortunately, number 3 was the last of the 3 to go. Well, lucky for us, 3 was still available. Now today we've honored the astronauts with it. The meatball, as NASA refers to it on the side of the cab, we redesigned to make it about us. The CMPA stands for the City of Madison Port Authority. If you look closely, instead of an orbiter rolling around, it's an SW1500. In addition to that artwork, which was put on about 2 years ago, we decided to add a Gus Grissom quote on the side of the locomotive to honor the NASA astronauts that have started all the way back with Mercury program, all the way through Apollo, all the way through the Space Shuttle program, and those in the future. You know, Indiana is known to produce a lot of astronauts, especially through Purdue University. And we have a lot of homegrown astronauts right here in Indiana. So we want to honor all the astronauts because the sacrifice was great, especially in those early days. And today was the day that we did that. The Voss family was here. In addition, we had a cousin of Gus Grissom. And then we had Mr. John Thiers, who is the manager of the NASA Railroad. So it was a great day for NASA history right here in Indiana. Locomotive 4 was originally built in 1943 for the Atlantic Coastline Railroad. Later became Seaboard and down through the family lines. Was later retired sometime, our best estimate is sometime in the 70s. In the 1980s, the Navy acquired it along with several other locomotives, and it was sent to a company called Maxon up in Minnesota. And it was completely rebuilt, and it was assigned to Crane Naval Depot in Crane, Indiana, near Bloomington. We acquired it just a few years ago, and we decided to take it out of the yellow that it was in. And when we were looking at a paint scheme, we were determining whether or not we wanted to go back into our City of Madison Port Authority schemes or the NASA locomotive scheme, because we had it on the railroad at that time. And we decided, why not dedicate it to the veterans? So we decided to pick the paint based on the Navy Blue Angels. The actual painting on the side of it is actually the USS Indianapolis. Now, we did not put USS Indianapolis anywhere on there because we want to make sure that the locomotive is always dedicated to the Navy and not one particular ship. Once the artwork was done, we had to run around using this locomotive and to keep it concealed. So to keep it concealed, we had a piece of plywood bolted over the artwork until today. So the locomotive's been in service with the USS Indianapolis on the side, but we've been hiding it with a really crappy piece of plywood over it. So in the end, it's great to have the plywood off and have it out there where people will be able to see it. And when locomotives on the Madison Railroad blow their horn at a grade crossing, we're hoping that people stop, look, and notice what is going across that crossing and ask why they are what they are. Well, interesting thing about number 5, it was originally number 10 when we received it. The previous history to it, it was built in 1943 for the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railroad. I believe there was only 5 or 6 of those locomotives built as VO 1000 Baldwins. This, as far as we know, is the last one left. Of course, it was re-engined, much like its sister engine with an EMD engine. It later made its way through the family lines, I believe possibly L&N. It was later retired in the 1970s. The Navy acquired it with other locomotives that were of the Baldwin heritage that had EMD engines in them, as well as they also acquired several of them that still had the Baldwin engines in them. They sent them out, in this case, these 2 particular locomotives, including number 5, was sent to Maxon in Minnesota. It was completely rebuilt from stem to stern, Navy term, and we acquired it when the Navy Crane Base no longer needed it, which is where it was assigned after its rebuilt. So it was used up till about 2015, was retired. We received it. At that time it was number 10. However, when it came out of Maxon, we're showing some evidence that it was actually number 6. The actual retired Navy number that is located on the ends of the locomotives starts out as a 65-00 number. Well, that number does not match the casting number that is on the coupler casting, which the Navy had inscribed in there whenever they had them rebuilt by Maxon. So the original casting number, even though it doesn't match that, if we trace that casting number back, it shows it as a Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railroad locomotive. When it had that original number on it, if you were to look it up, it actually shows that it was a U.S. Army War Department engine built in 1942. Two numbers didn't match, so we're going with the casting number, even though on the end we're showing the wrong 6500 number because that was the number it had when we received it. Number 5 has its patent number plate still on it above the rear door. If you take that patent number and you apply it to the U.S. Patent Office and see what it is, it's actually for the Baldwin Locomotives Works patent for their steam locomotive cab. So these particular cabs on number 4 and 5 could have ended up, when they were fabricating these locomotives in 1942, they could have ended up on a steam locomotive or they could have ended up on a diesel locomotive. The cab was universal. These just so happened to end up on a diesel locomotive and therefore they survived to this day. We decided to honor the veterans, those that have went before us, that have fallen in service to our country, as well as those that are alive, as well as the families of all the veterans in the United States, of all 5 branches. So in order to do that, we decided we needed to have a painting. A local art teacher in North Vernon, Indiana, came up with what we had in our mind. We covered all 5 branches of the military with number 5. So now the trick is to keep this as good looking as it is now for the rest of its career here at the Madison Railroad.